Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the Transportation and Environment Committee. General Manager, Ms. Reed, welcome. Can you introduce your esteemed panel?
Yes. Thank you, Chair Hucker and council members. Thank you for being here. And we are, well, first of all, for the record, I'm Carla Reed. I'm the General Manager, CEO of the Washington Suburban Sanitary Commission. And joining me today are our esteemed commissioners. Two commissioners. We have Howie Dennis and Fausto Bayonet. Also sitting with us on the panel are Joe Beach, our Deputy General Manager for Administration, and also one of our engineers, Ms. Sarah Titus, who is very involved with our innovations program. So thank you for the opportunity to speak to you today.
Thank you for coming. Mr. Lopchenko.
Yes, we do have two items related to WSSC on the agenda. The first is a briefing from WSSC on their innovation program, and then we have the WSSC CIP behind that. So we'll have the folks at the table can pretty much stay for both items. So without further ado, let's just go into the briefing. And I'm not sure if WSSC wants questions along the way or if you want to complete the briefing first and then have questions, but however you want to move forward with that.
I'd be okay with questions along the way.
Okay. Questions along the way it is.
So, good afternoon. My name is Sarah Titus. I'm the Engineering Research Specialist for WSSC, and I'll be talking to you today about our innovation program. Okay, so what I'm going to be covering are our goals for our innovation program, how we're trying to move our culture towards innovation, and we'll also be talking about some of the successes that we're already experiencing within the innovation program, as well as who our research partners are, and I'll even be able to touch on some of our climate change and assessment efforts that we're going through. So first of all, WSSC, who are we? We're a very large water and wastewater utility. We are over 100 years old at this point. We just last year celebrated our 100th birthday. So what does that tell you? We're large, we're complex, and we're aging. And so that poses a significant number of challenges that the innovation program is well equipped and positioning ourselves to address. So the focus of our innovation program, we have 3 areas of focus. We want to reduce costs. We would like to improve sustainability, and we're also always looking for different revenue streams to help reduce the strain on our customers. How are we doing that? We're inspiring innovation engagement within our employees. Because we know that we have a lot of creativity within the commission already, and we just want to elevate that and better utilize that. And our focus areas are our water and sewer networks, as well as our water plants and our resource recovery facilities. So how do we do this? So how do you develop an innovation program? What we started out with was my boss, Keith Tyson. He participated with a number of other utilities who were, some were farther along than we were in our innovation program, and some weren't as far along as we were, in part of the Water Research Foundation project. And what they did as a collaborative effort was develop a framework that we could use, as well as other utilities in the U.S., for how to develop an innovation program. And so we took some of those tools that were developed, such as a survey for our internal WSSC employees to take, to do a benchmarking of where we are culturally with innovation as of last summer. We took those results, we brought them back to our senior leadership team and held workshops and discussed a plan of where we are and where we want to go in the future. And so this graph, oh, go ahead.
Sorry, I'll interrupt you with the first question.
Yeah.
So I'm really glad you're engaging employees. I wish all our agencies did that, took that approach. Frontline employees often have a lot of the best ideas and see a lot of the gaps that managers don't see. I wanted to ask, it's great you're doing the survey. What avenues are available to employees who want to report problems or make suggestions confidentially?
Oh, well, so actually I'll get into that in a lot of detail in this presentation, but I'll skip ahead a little bit and talk about our Innovation Hub. So we've developed an online application that anyone within WSSC can access through our intranet, and they click on it and they just put in their idea of how we can do our work better. And
thought
so,
that They
yeah.
don't have to put their employee name or number or anything.
Well, this isn't a depository for complaints. This is a way, it's more of a positive spin on that. So it's something like they see a challenge, but they already have thought of a solution. So they're going through their work and they're like, if only we didn't have to do it this way. If we could do it this other way, we could do it faster, cheaper, safer, whatever it would be. And for whatever reason, they don't feel comfortable going up through their chain of command. That could be a potential, cause for them to want to go to the Innovation Hub to get it evaluated and brought up to a higher level of the consciousness within the community.
Can they make those suggestions confidentially?
They
on the Innovation
can.
Hub?
They can, yes. Well, actually, what'll end up happening is if they do it confidentially is we have at each of the facilities identified innovation insiders, is what we call them. And they're people who they are not in a management level. They are at kind of the worker bee level. And anyone can go to them and say, this is my idea, tell them, and then they can put it in for them. So there is an avenue that's a little more confidential, but if you put it into the Innovation Hub right now, they do ask for a name. It doesn't have to be their name, but that's an interesting point of view because the focus of this is more for how can we improve.
Sure.
Yeah.
Those are, I
So it
understand
didn't
two
even.
different things.
It's something I can take under advisement. It wasn't something that crossed my mind that people would want to be confidential for it.
I would want to.
Yeah.
I would want to encourage you to
Yeah.
set up avenues where whistleblowers can feel like they can come forward without risking their job or their
Oh, and we
professional
do have-
career.
oh, I'm so
I've,
sorry.
I've
We-
had
we do have
WSSC
that sort of
employees.
thing.
Okay.
Outside of the innovation program.
Okay.
Yes, I'm sorry, I misunderstood that, yeah. So I believe through like our ethics office, we can, there's a hotline you can call and be completely anonymous, and that's for more of the whistleblowing type.
Or just waste they might see or duplication or whatever.
Yes.
Right.
Mhm.
Okay.
Yes.
I've heard about that. Okay. Go ahead. Sorry.
Yes. Sorry, I'm so focused on innovation, right? So what were our key takeaways from this effort from our employee engagement surveys? And so what you can see here is the blue line shows you where we currently are at from a cultural perspective, and the orange is where we would like to be. And you can see in the first quadrant that's labeled clan, and the bottom quadrant that's labeled market, that we have a lot of overlap. So we're already where we want to be in those two areas, meaning we have a family work environment, that's the clan aspect, we want to keep it that way. We also have a very strong focus on what our main deliverables are, meaning that we know we have to meet certain regulatory requirements, and that will continue to be our focus and priority.
I think Councilmember Reamer has a
I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, I may have missed it. How did you measure those data points again?
So those were based off of the employee surveys and interviews that we had internally. So we gathered all of that information, and we actually had a consultant that helped us to put this together. So based on those results, they put together these graphs to say what did.
Like a standardized approach for organizations, so. Okay.
Yes, which was developed through the Water Research Foundation efforts, yeah. Yes, and so the places that we want to adjust are, you can see in the bottom hierarchy quadrant and the top adhocracy quadrant. What that's pretty much saying is right now we are very structured and siloed, and we would like to allow for more flexibility to step outside of your everyday role to work more collaboratively. And so that's something that we're working on as part of our culture shift. I'm having a little, there we go. Okay, so how do we do this changing of culture? So first, we define what our innovation process is going to be, and we identify our resources, not only ones like myself, who are 100% of our time is dedicated to the innovation program, but also resources within the organization who have brought themselves forward to say, I'm really excited about innovation, I want to be more involved. And we create awareness. We do a lot of internal marketing to make sure everybody knows what's going on, that this is how they can participate if they would like to. And employee engagement, we held innovation workshops. We held over a dozen of them within the last 12 months at every single one of our facilities, targeting everybody within the commission. And what we did was we introduced the Innovation Hub, which is something I touched on previously, and I'll talk again on the next slide. We shared our successes that we're having within the innovation program, which is something else I'm gonna bring up later on in this presentation. And then we had each of those locations pre-identify challenges that they were currently experiencing, and then we brainstormed actively together as a group on potential solutions so that it was something that they could see innovation can impact my day-to-day functioning within WSSC. So the Innovation Hub, as I already said, it's an application. You can go on, anyone within WSSC can go on, fill out a small form, and it goes into the process, which is the way that we evaluate it. It's based on set criteria, and those suggestions that have the highest level of impact and the best chance of success, those rise to the top and have the most potential for being funded and implemented. Okay, so next I'm going to be talking about some of the successes that we've already been experiencing. So I'm going to go into some of the pilots that we're doing. So first of all, leak detection. Why is leak detection important to us? There's several reasons. First of all, it helps us to reduce our non-revenue water loss. Secondly, we've talked to a lot of other utilities who did implement leak detection programs to a much greater extent than we currently are, and they actually noticed a significant decrease in their water main breaks. So we're hoping to realize that as well. Reduction in water main breaks, it helps us financially as well as our customers, less impact to them, as well as allow us to potentially better target different areas within our system for water main replacement projects. And so the three technologies that we piloted last year, the top two that are shown in those pictures are acoustic technologies. Let me pause and take a step back. I'll explain to you how we currently do our leak detection. We have crews that go out and manually listen at each of our fire hydrants to see if they can hear a leak sound, and then by that pinpoint where these leaks are. What we're looking for are technologies to help what we're currently doing to be more effective. And so the first two technologies are acoustic technologies. What we do with those is we develop a grid within our system, and every night they turn on and they listen at the same time, and if multiple units within that grid hear a leak sound, they can correlate and say, we think a leak is right here, and then we would send our crews out to investigate that very small area instead of the whole area. And then the last technology, which is Utilis, it's a satellite technology. It was a technology that was developed to find water on Mars. What it does is it scans our area, and it looks for pooling of water underground, and it can distinguish between groundwater and treated water. And if it finds a pool of treated water, it'll do the same thing. It'll notify us and say, hey, get some ground crews over here to this particular area because we think there's a leak there. And so these are some of our results. So not to get into the weeds on this particular slide.
Any sign of Matt Damon?
Too late.
No, I wish, right? So the first two options that we extrapolated based on our pilot results were just pretty much status quo options, using the same technology that we're currently using, listening at those hydrants, and predicting if we expanded that to 20% of our system, how many leaks do we project to find. The last three are those same predictions, but based off of the pilot results for those three technologies. So option 3 and 4 are the acoustic technologies, and option 5 is the satellite technology. And so all of those technologies have the potential to significantly increase the number of leaks that we're able to find in our system, all with the same level of effort from our crews.
Sarah, I asked this in our pre-meeting, but I forget the answer. How does the satellite detect the difference between the groundwater and the spilled treated water?
Yeah, great question. So they use spectroscopy. So that's one way that scientists use to determine the chemical components within a solution. And so they'll look for chlorine and fluoride.
Okay.
Yeah, so those are the two significant signatures that they're looking for that say this is treated water.
Terrific.
Yeah. So as you can see, all three of those technologies can significantly improve the number of leaks found, but let's look at the numbers because we don't want to be wasteful of our resources. So our cost per leak found, as you can see, the satellite technology reduces our current cost per leak found significantly and was much cheaper than both of the other two technologies. And so based on that, we decided that the next step is for us to actually implement this on a larger scale. And so next year, we're going to implement the satellite technology and hopefully confirm all of our pilot results and find a lot more leaks within our system.
Quick question. Can you go back to the pilot results and predictions? What are those, the dollar amounts? What do they correlate to exactly?
The cost per leak found. So it is, because Utilis is able to find more leaks than we currently are, the cost per leak found is significantly less than what we currently are doing. did that answer your question, or did you need more detail?
Sure. So, to think of it a different way, the Ecologics, the leak that is found by Ecologics is the highest cost savings.
It's the highest cost.
Highest
We spend
cost.
the most money to find that leak.
Got it.
Because they have equipment that is expensive,
More than you currently spend,
more than we currently spend to find a
whereas
leak.
Utilis' savings.
Yes,
it. Thank
that's
you.
true, exactly.
Okay.
Well said. Okay, so the next pilot that I'm going to discuss with you is the enhanced biological phosphorus removal. And so the potential benefits of this is to reduce our alum consumption. And that's a chemical that we use to flocculate, and it helps us to remove things like turbidity and color. It can also help us to produce a higher quality fertilizer than we currently are, and potentially it supports our Piscataway bioenergy facility performance that we're planning on having in the future. And so the results of that pilot were very promising. So the yellow section on that picture shows the fermentation zone that we added to our existing system. And what we found was by adding that fermentation area, we were able to drop our alum consumption by 45%, which was a significant savings monetarily. And so this is something that we're thinking about implementing. And then the next one I want to talk about is peracetic acid disinfection. So, and this is at Parkway. So Parkway, what they currently use for disinfection is sodium hypochlorite, and then they have to dechlorinate with sodium bisulfite. Instead of using those two chemicals, you can use one chemical, which is peracetic acid. And so we performed this pilot test, and it was successful. And some of the benefits of those, of peracetic acid use is that it's a quote-unquote organic chemical. It breaks down to three things, vinegar, carbon dioxide, water. Things that are environmentally less debilitating than chlorine, and especially chlorine that can form chlorinated disinfection byproducts, which can be a problem. So we're trying to avoid that as well. And the only issue right now is because there's such limited usage of this chemical in the United States, production is relatively low and the cost is still a little bit higher than those two chemicals combined. But what we anticipate and are planning for and are preparing for is that more utilities will go this route. And as that cost of peracetic acid decreases, we're prepared to implement this as we've had success with our pilots. And so now I'm going to talk about some future technologies that we're interested in. Primus Line is a high-pressure Kevlar material that you can use to line water and sewer pipes. And so one of the big advantages to this is the small footprint for the laydown area. And for projects specifically for bridge crossings, this could be an excellent fit and reduce our impact on shutting down roadways when we're lining some of our more difficult pipes. HydroGuard is a really interesting technology. We've already installed one type of this unit. There are two types. The type that we've already installed is a unit where on a pre-programmed basis, it will flush the system. So it'll turn on whatever time we say it to turn on, flush for however long, and then turn off again. And we put this in areas where we have some complaints about discolored water. And since implementing that in those areas, we've had zero discolored water complaints from those areas. So it's very successful in that. They have another offering that is called a smart unit, where it allows you to measure constantly both chlorine and turbidity. And by measuring those, what it allows you to do is if it gets out of a specific range, it will automatically turn on to flush until it gets back into the range. So we're investigating to see if the cost benefit of using that is such that we want to pursue it, but it might be a pilot that we do in this next year. Next, I'm going to talk about Abyss Solutions. So currently when we are doing some of our condition assessment of our gravity sewer lines, what we do is we put CCTV through the line, and then we take it back to our office, and someone manually looks at it and codes all of the defects in the pipe. Instead of having to do that manual coding by a human in the office, you can use artificial intelligence, and they can do it in a fraction of the time at more accuracy, and they can even track from one CCTV to the next one how that defect changes with time. So it's something that we're looking into, and I believe we are in good shape to pilot that soon. And then the last one I want to talk to you about today is drones, which everybody is usually pretty excited about drones. We have a pilot that is very close to being started to help with our trunk walks. So in environmentally sensitive areas, wooded areas, places that people aren't there to see if how our assets are doing, we have someone go out and walk that line to evaluate the condition of the trunk lines. But instead, you could send a drone and take the video, and someone could be watching back at the office, and not have to do all of that walking. That could save us some time.
What's a trunk?
Oh, it's part of our sewer system. It's like the large sewer mains.
So you put the drone into the pipe and it flies, or this is above ground?
This is above ground, yeah. So what happens in these environmentally sensitive areas is if there's issues going on, you won't know about it because nobody's back there to find, but a lot of times issues will surface. And so people will go and look for those, yeah. And this way, a drone can do it. But there's other things that we can use it for, and we're talking more with technology providers on that. Okay, so it's one thing to get everybody within WSSC to collaborate, but innovation can't stop within our walls. It's best if we can branch out. And so one of the things that we have done is we've created a Mid-Atlantic Innovation and Research Forum, which is a bunch of neighboring utilities within the region. We get together, we talk about issues that we're all facing, and see where we can best utilize our assets to get the same results that we need. So for example, if we're doing pilots, we don't want to pay and do a second pilot that DC Water just did. We want to be able to share our results, and vice versa. Or even potentially go in for a Water Research Foundation project by everybody going in together saying we're all interested in this particular area. We've also worked with Virginia Tech and Rutgers on anaerobic digestion and biofiltration. And we have a capstone project going on with Penn State, which I can't get into the details of, but I can say that it's something that we hope is patentable that we'll get out of this, and something that potentially we could market in the future.
What does capstone mean?
Oh, it just means that for them, it's like the senior design project for them, and it's interdisciplinary teams. So, yeah, they're designing and building a prototype of something we've asked for.
And so on that, the proprietary nature you alluded to, is that because of an investment that you all made into that program?
It's because the type of what we want them to design has never been designed before. And so part of the program that we are going through with Penn State requires them to sign over all of the IP to us because it really was our initial idea. And so we might want to patent the results of what they've developed.
So then let me broaden it out. The research partners, is there an R&D component to the budget that is that you hand over to some of these, or that you invest in some of these relationships?
If I understand your question correctly, I would think the answer is yes. Part of our budget does go to funding some of these research efforts off-site, yes. Okay, so now we're moving into climate change, vulnerability assessment, adaptation, and mitigation planning.
Sorry, Sarah, before you move
Yes.
on, can I just ask,
Yeah.
back to HydroGuard?
Yes.
That technology, how far up the trunk are you able to target the flushing?
Oh, so what's the level of
So-
impact?
Well, we receive complaints, for example, I'll just tell you my consumer level of constituent complaints, discolored water in my building at just one multifamily unit, discolored water in my neighborhood, we see that a fair amount, and then, even broader than that. So how much can you target that treatment
Well,
to pinpoint?
I don't know that I have enough data back from these usages yet to say that for sure. My feeling is that if there is an area that does have discolored water complaints consistently, we would start with one unit, and then if that doesn't cover the entire area of complaint, we have the option of adding another unit. So,
You can send it just to one residential line?
yeah, so it'll go, we'll have to pick a water main to attach it to. And so what I think your question is how far of an impact would that go? I think it depends on how that particular neighborhood is set up as to how many houses or how big much of the development could be positively impacted by adding one of these. It would be kind of site-specific. I don't know that I could say.
It's in a traditional residential neighborhood, you're able to just go at the street level, get down to the main, and then you're able to do it street by street?
Yeah, so my understanding is we've installed this in 2 locations, and that it was at it's usually at the end of a cul-de-sac where we see a lot of these issues. And so you'd put it at the end of the cul-de-sac to draw the new water in. And I don't have enough details to say specifically how many houses in those areas were originally impacted to say how successful. Like, I know that wherever the complaints were coming from, it corrected them, but I don't know how much of that community was originally impacted.
And what's used for the flushing?
Water. So we just pull more of our water through the system.
I thought there was a chemical marker you added to it to,
No.
how is that water different than the water that was coming through before?
So what happens a lot of times, these discolored water issues are because water has been a little bit stagnant in that particular trunk. And so just by pulling in fresh water, it can correct the problem.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Okay, so for the climate change issue, what we've been investigating is how much could climate change impact things like rainfall and flooding in our area. And so one of the things that we've seen is that the 10-year and 100-year storm rainfall depth projections are predicted to increase significantly over the next several decades. And so because of that, we have to do some evaluations, which I'll talk about on the next slide. But in addition to that, we have to look at what our impact is on climate change as well. So we're looking at our own greenhouse gas emissions, and we have plans in place on how we can reduce that to governmental regulations within that time frame. And so one of the things that I'm going to talk about is what are we doing now that we know that we have some changes in our environment coming. So we're looking at all of our assets, and we're doing a risk assessment and saying, how much risk is it that this particular asset is going to be impacted by climate change? If the risk is high, what's the level of impact of having that risk be actualized, right? So we do a cost-benefit analysis there and prioritize our assets. And so far, we have 200 WSSC facilities in the GIS system, and 44 are near or in floodplains. 18 are prioritized for future flood modeling. 9 vulnerability assessments have already been performed to date. So we're making a lot of headway in that area. And so at this point, I'm just going to close and see if there's any additional questions from anyone that I can help.
Let's go back to that.
Sure.
So these are facilities that if there was more flooding, there would be risk of damage to the facilities.
Yes.
These aren't like measuring flooding or something like that. Okay.
That's right.
Is that a major, why is it that that's the one you reference as opposed to other risks of climate change?
That's a good question. And I'm not directly involved with this, but my understanding is that we've evaluated that that's the primary risk to our assets.
Yeah, I could say that water, wastewater utilities are especially at risk. Our assets are especially at risk from some of the challenges with climate change in terms of additional sanitary sewer overflows, the proximity of our water filtration plants near the Potomac River and the Patuxent River. So water utilities throughout the country are especially at risk. In fact, in my wheelhouse, and the rating agencies are beginning to ask us about how are you preparing for climate change? Are you doing these type of assessment studies? WSSC was very, before I came there, very, sort of far looking in that respect, and they started this a few years ago. I think this is the 4th of the 5th year. It's a multi-year study. And part of this is adaptation. What kind of hardening do we need to do to our facilities to get them ready for the additional rainfall, the other effects of climate change?
Okay,
Thank you.
you all set? Thank you all so much. We always really appreciate the openness in WSSC's culture to innovation and using technology to meet all the challenges in front of you. So we really appreciate, and we expect you to keep us abreast of as all these move forward. Thank you very much for your hard work. Okay, Mr. Levchenko, are we on to the CIP?
Yeah, onward to the CIP. And despite all the innovation you just heard about, they still have quite a sizable CIP that we have to deal with. What I've tried to lay out in the packet, and understanding we do have some new committee members, I tried to put some background in the packet on this. But certainly as we go through this, If you have some basic questions about the CIP, please let us know. We've got plenty of people here that can answer those questions. I did want to note that unlike the other agencies and county government, WSSC is required by state law to do a CIP every year, and so we do see a full CIP every year, whereas we're dealing with amendments and the capital budget, if you will, elsewhere in the CIP. So it is a full CIP. The other distinction is within WSSC's CIP presentation, there are specific definitions of what a CIP project is, and that is not all the infrastructure that WSSC has to deal with. But for purposes of our review, those additional projects, which are called information-only projects in the CIP, while not CIP projects, they walk and talk a lot like CIP projects, and we deal with them as if they were. The only reason I say that is because when you are looking at just a CIP number, it may or may not include those, and so it does add to some confusion. So I do try to distinguish that in the packet. And the other thing I'll note is the other wrinkle in the process is because WSSC is a bi-county agency, at the end of the process, both for the CIP and for the operating budget, we have a bi-county meeting with the Prince George's County Council to finalize and address any differences in the recommendations between the two councils. They also do the combined portion of park and planning as well during that. So that's one distinction. Right now, the tentative date for that meeting is May 9th. We're still firming that up, but that's the typical time we do it, right about the time where we're finalizing our council recommendations, but before we've actually reconciled the full operating and CIPs at that point. Another unique aspect to WSSC is we do have a spending control limits process each fall, and as we did last fall. So WSSC does have some ceilings that it works within. And I've noted in the packet, with regard to the CIP, the focus is really debt service. That's the real driver on the operating side, and it is one of those limits. And so we do look at that in terms of what will the CIP generate and what will that impact be in terms of the spending control limits affecting the operating budget. The operating budget is not out yet. We do have a public hearing draft that's out for comment, but we'll be getting WSSC's formal proposal by March 1st. With regard to, and I'm on page 3 of the packet, by the way, with regard to the county executive recommendations, he did not have any specific changes to the proposed CIP. He did note, did have some comments regarding the Blue Plains projects, which we'll talk about in a little bit. And he's also had some comments regarding the Potomac Consent Decree project, which we can also talk about in a little bit. In terms of the fiscal highlights, on page 4 of the packet, I display the approved CIP, the FY19 through 24, the proposed CIP, and then also the equivalent numbers for the information-only projects. And this highlights quite well the how significant the information-only projects are in terms of cost. You can see the proposed CIP is about $1.9 billion, and the information projects would add about another $1.4 billion to it. So these are major infrastructure projects. They just don't quite meet the definition of the CIP from the state standpoint. In terms of the proposed CIP, it is showing about a 7.2% decrease, and I've noted here some of the major causes of that, including the deferral of the Potomac Submerged Channel Intake Project out of the CIP. There's also a lot of projects moving through construction, very large, big-ticket items that as expenditures move out of year 1 in the CIP to past tense, they move out of the 6-year total. So there's about, I counted about $53 million in reduction just from that. And then on the plus side of the docket, we do have 4 new projects in entering the CIP, about $36 million in the 6-year total. So that's adding. We also have some increases in existing projects. I noted here the large diameter water pipe rehabilitation program project. It's a very large project, so the $10.4 million increase is actually a relatively small portion of that project, but it is showing a modest increase. The information-only projects are also noted here. They're showing a slight increase. It noted in the chart is about 2.7%. The biggest projects by far in that are the water main reconstruction and the sewer main reconstruction projects, which we can talk about in a little bit as well. When you factor in all of these projects, the CIP as well as the information only, we're still seeing about $110 million decrease overall in the funding from the approved to the proposed. And similarly, when we remove the Prince George's County project, since our council focuses on the Bi-County projects and the Montgomery County projects, you see a similar trend in those budget numbers.
You want to go through it all and then talk, or
No, I think we would probably take,
go as we go?
yeah.
Okay. I think you'll probably pull this out a little bit later, but the decrease associated with the submerged channel intake, it
It's
must be,
about $78 million.
that's related to the as-of-yet consent decree that's unknown, or is that not?
Well, obviously, they're related to the same facility, but the submerged channel intake project has actually been in the CIP for a number of years. It was intended to address sediment issues that are more apparent at the edge of the river as opposed to if you create a mid-river intake. And the intent there was to save on chemical costs. Also, having a second intake has a lot of security advantages to it. And also, to the degree there are issues in the river itself, like we had with that oil sheen several years ago. If you have a shore intake and a mid-river intake, it gives you some flexibility going forward. With all that said, it has been mired in review for many years, partly due to the National Park Service interest in the property because of the C&O Canal National Park going right through that edge of the plant. And it's been through multiple design reviews over time, and the project cost has increased substantially. Also, as you referenced, a couple of years ago, the Potomac consent decree issue came before us. And unfortunately, the submerged channel intake project does not really address the primary issues in that. So it doesn't really buy you much in terms of the consent decree. So we had certainly the fiscal issue of having to deal with the consent decree project and the submerged channel intake, and the fact that the intake project was not going to provide the kind of benefit that would be needed. So in this CIP, the WSSC has recommended deferring it. Staff is comfortable with that as well. Some of the consent decree issues or solutions may help with what the submerged channel intake was intended to do as well. So I think there is some benefit to letting that process play out. Also, the fact that the project's been delayed for so long, staff is somewhat skeptical that it was going to move anytime soon anyway. So from that perspective, staff is comfortable pushing it out beyond the 6-year period. I don't know if WSSC wanted to add anything to that. That is probably the major reduction in this CIP before us today. We've got marginal changes and some increases, but that's sort of a significant ongoing project that's been deferred.
But is the consent decree this issue that I've heard about some really big issues with that facility and the possibility of having to, start fresh and do a new facility or something? I mean, I've heard that there's some major issues upriver, so to speak.
Well, the consent decree is going to require us to remove more of the solids that we already get out of the river. But it really comes at a time when we have these huge weather events. So it's not like it's solving a daily treatment process problem. It is these anomalies that the Maryland Department of the Environment is expecting us to control through these improvements that are probably they're going to help the overall plant operation. Mark, would you like to add anything?
That's it, yes.
Picking up off of that, though, if I recall correctly, I think the executive has talked about other ways to remediate that problem. Any of you familiar?
Well, the executive, he mentioned, and this gets actually back to the submerged channel intake project. One of the benefits of the submerged channel intake was to avoid the sediment along the shore of the river that was coming from Watts Branch. And the mid-river intake would help you avoid that. And so the logical question is, well, if there's something wrong with Watts Branch, maybe we should do some improvements and stream restoration projects there to help with that. I think, unfortunately, that doesn't solve the consent decree issue, which is a peaking issue during major storm events, whereas the Watts Branch issue is a sort of a regular issue with sediment along the shoreline of the river. So doing those improvements is certainly a good idea if we can find the resources to do it, but that would not help you meet the consent decree. At least, and let me know.
Your recollection of that public conversation that I've heard numerous times is correct. It's Watts Branch that has been alluded to or referenced in relation to this project. But as I hear you saying, they are, one doesn't solve the other.
And certainly when the submerged channel intake project has been discussed, people have raised the same issue. They say rather than build a better intake, fix the issue about, upstream of the river. So that issue is not new. That's been something that's been talked about for some time. Unfortunately, though, the consent decree is fighting a different battle. And to get to no solids discharges into the river requires dealing with the peaks that you have to deal with storm events. And that requires just more capacity in the plant to manage the solids.
Thank you for that clarification.
Next in my packet, I just as a summary for the new council members especially, the major funding sources are noted for the CIP. The chart clearly shows that bonds are the primary funding source or major funding source. They're actually dipping slightly for the reasons we noted earlier. You also do have a significant SDC and other category. The SDC and the other, which are contributions, are intended to ensure that growth pays for growth. So to the degree there are developments, for instance, that move forward that are adding or that require capacity to be added to the system, those projects would be funded either with SDC or with contributions from developers. So one way or the other, the developer has to pay for that infrastructure. Either they contribute directly to the infrastructure that's needed, or if they're not contributing, then they have to pay SDC charges that are then used to pay for that infrastructure. So that's been in place for a number of years. And each year, both councils have to approve the SDC charges that new folks connecting to the system have to pay. And so we see that also during the operating budget process. For a number of years, we were having some projected gaps or deficits in the SDC fund because we had some very large projects moving forward. But because we were projecting those to end, by the out years, the fund was looking more healthy. So, and that's as it appears in the packet today, the fund does look more healthy over the 6-year period than it has in the past because some of these projects have actually moved forward and been completed. Meanwhile, the funding is still coming in through the SDC charges. I've noted on page 7 the new projects, the 4 new projects I mentioned earlier. 3 of them are in Montgomery County. They all have some SDC component to them, so they're all growth-related, although not necessarily 100% growth, and that's why you see some of them will have bonds and SDC. WSC assesses what portion is capacity and what portion is system improvement, if you will. So that's how those are allocated. Staff does not have any issues with these projects. I don't know if council members have any further information they'd like on those. Page 9 of the packet, and I'm not going to go through this chart in any depth, just shows the major 6-year changes in the Montgomery County and Bi-County projects and those information-only projects. Starting at the top, you see the largest 6-year cost increase, and then at the bottom is the largest 6-year cost decrease. And so as we talked about earlier, the Potomac submerged channel intake is at the bottom. That's the single largest decrease appearing in the CIP. And then at the top, you have the water reconstruction program. And then in between, you have lots of other projects, some of which are just moving through construction. Some have had inflationary increases. Some are actually moving forward with affirmed scopes of projects or bids that have come in, and so those are now reflected in these costs. And some go down, some have gone up, but this is just sort of a one-page review of all of those projects. If the council members had any particular questions, this is one place they could go to see what's happening in a particular project. And we'll talk about a few of these that I've pointed out later in the packet. On page 10 of the packet, I note the Blue Plains project costs. WSSC does send a sizable portion of its flows to Blue Plains. The vast majority of Montgomery County's flows go to Blue Plains, and about 50 or 60%, I believe, of Prince George's go to Blue Plains as well. So we pay on the capital side based on the capacity that we've reserved at Blue Plains. And so projects that benefit us at Blue Plains, we're on the hook for our portion of that capacity. And then on the operating side, we pay based on actual flows that go to Blue Plains. And it's about, here about 12% of the total CIP and information-only spending. In some years, we have seen significant increases in this, especially when Blue Plains was moving forward with its Biosolids digester project and also its enhanced nutrient reduction projects. Both of those have moved through the CIP, and so what we're seeing here are more, level status type of effort going forward. Blue Plains is a massive plant, so there's always going to be rehab work going on and identified. So we expect to see increases in this at some level in perpetuity, but we're not seeing the kinds of increases that we were seeing in past years. The next project I note here is the Potomac Consent Decree Program, and this is still a bit in flux. The WSSC had come up with a solution to meet the consent decree and had sent that to the state, both in terms of short-term projects and long-term projects. The short-term projects were accepted, but the long-term projects was not, because it did not meet the full elimination of discharges into the river. And also WSSC identified that the work that they had estimated to do and piloted was not actually achieving what it hoped it would achieve anyway. So they had to come back to the state last fall with a revised long-term plan. That long-term plan has about a $35 to $40 million additional price tag, assuming it moves forward as expected. That's not reflected in this project at this time. We're still waiting for WSSC and MDE to come to conclusion on that process. The short-term projects are moving forward, and the FY20 costs would not be affected by whatever changes do occur in the project. So we can certainly revisit that project when we have more firm information in front of us. I think we already talked about the Potomac Submerged Channel Intake Project. Another project of major interest to both councils and counties is the Large Diameter Water Pipe and Large Valve Rehabilitation Program project. I've noted on page 12, it's a $382 million project over 6 years. Both counties have experienced large PCCP pipe failures. Fortunately, not as recently, or not in the last few years, but in the late 2000s and early teens, there have been a number of breaks and near misses that were a very, very big concern to both counties because of the potential impact of these failures and the catastrophic impact. So WSSC invested a lot of resources into its inspection program and rehab program, both on the operating and the capital side. This is the capital piece of it. And the inspection process was able to inventory the entire system, and they've already gone through that process, but then the inspections then continue on a regular basis going forward. But we are at more of a steady state in this project going forward, so we're not seeing the kinds of price fluctuations that we were early on as they identified more and more work that needed to be done. I don't know if the council members had any questions about this particular project.
I think we're good.
The trunk sewer reconstruction program, also dealing with large diameter pipe, but this time on the sewer side, is one of the major funding sources for the SSO consent decree that WSSC has been under for a number of years. Fortunately, we are moving towards completion of that. And so this project is, once again, not seeing the kinds of increases we were seeing a few years ago as this work was ramping up. So we are expecting this work to be completed. The deadline extension is 2022. So, and of course, there'll be continued work after the SSO consent decree is met as regular infrastructure work has to be done. But we won't see the kind of bump in this project that we saw a few years ago. The next project I wanted to note is the Piscataway Bioenergy Project. I had mentioned earlier the Biosolids project at Blue Plains. This is a similar effort to address how to deal with WSSC's biosolids that are generated from WSSC's wastewater treatment plants. And this is the long-term solution that WSSC is moving forward with. It basically does a couple things. One, it reduces the volume through this process. It also improves the quality of the biosolids from what's currently a Class B biosolids to a Class A. And the Class A is more marketable, higher value, and easier to sell, or more markets for it. It also, as part of this process, there's a combined heat and power element to this, which allows you to capture energy that can be used to power the plant, in this case the Piscataway plant where this project would be. So it does have a significant cost benefit going forward, as well as a cost avoidance of not having to upgrade the other wastewater treatment plants moving forward as you are having to deal with biosolids issues at all of those plants. Currently, the biosolids are sent away for land application. So there are storage issues at the plants, and then the cost for the land application. Those costs are avoided in this project. And in fact, I do have on Circle 60 of the packet, there's actually a calculation of the payback period for this project. And it shows the costs for the project, the cost avoidance, the projects you don't have to do because you're doing this project, and then the annual savings in operation and maintenance and energy generation. And it looks, based on these numbers, you have about a 26-year payback. Certainly that's a long payback, but given that most WSSC projects have no payback, it is, they'll take any payback. This project is, we're starting to see the cost of this project in the early years of the CIP now. It had been out there for a few years, so it is one of the major, big ticket items in this CIP.
Councilor
So is this is the stuff that you pull out of the water before it goes into the water pipe that people drink from? Is that what the biosolids are,
No,
or is this sewage?
On the sewer side, when you treat the
The other-
sewage,
okay.
you're separating the solids out as part of the treatment process. And the solids, there's
This is
strict.
out at Blue Plains then?
Well, Blue Plains have their own solids they have to deal with, including the flows that we send. But these are coming from our plants, or will be coming from the plants in Montgomery and Prince George's County. During the treatment process, you separate out the solids, and then there are very strict requirements about what you can do with those solids. And depending on how you treat them, there's, as I mentioned, there's a Class B treatment, and those can be used for certain land application processes, but can't be otherwise sold the way Class A solids can be. The Class A solids have to go through more treatment, such as through this. So
Is
that's
this burning them, or is this like composting them essentially, or what are we doing here?
It's not burning them, it's basically pressure cooking them. That's what the anaerobic digestion process is. So instead of paying to dispose of highly regulated Class B product that has to be trucked long distances, we're going to be producing Class A biosolids, which we can actually sell. It's basically equivalent to the fertilizer you can buy at Home Depot.
And generating energy.
And generate all the energy that we would need to run the plant, reducing our greenhouse gas emissions and meeting some of our greenhouse gas goals.
Okay, so you take the Class B and you transform it into Class A, and then you can sell it.
Through the process, correct.
the process also reduces the volume too, so you have less that you're dealing with at the end.
Correct, by 50% reduction.
Right.
So reduce it by half.
This is similar technology to what Blue Plains did on a much larger scale with its plant.
Okay. Thanks.
Further downhill.
The next projects I mentioned in the packet on page 14 are the water reconstruction and sewer reconstruction projects. These are the smaller diameter pipes, and they are very large ticket items in the information-only section, as well as the overall, CIP totals, if you will. And these are the projects that do touch a lot of communities in both counties, as well as with regard to sewer reconstruction, also a lot of stream valleys, parkland. So these could be very challenging projects to do as well. And we often do hear from the community about these projects as they're occurring, because they can be very disruptive. Most water lines and many sewer lines are in right-of-ways, and those right-of-ways have to be closed. These areas have to be dug up, patched, or fixed, patched. So there's a lot of disruption related to this. But on the sewer side, certainly the consent decree work drove a fair amount of that priority. So that work would be winding down, but given that WSSC has 5,000 plus miles of sewer and water lines each, that work has to be ongoing. You can't expect to get to an end state where you can pause. On the water side, WSSC, and you heard this a little bit earlier, they are looking at different technologies to identify how to better prioritize. There's been a lot of catch-up over the past 6 or 7 years in this program, and the mileage done, as I noted in the packet, has gone up substantially. It got as high as 55 miles of replacement in a given year. They're recommending actually to drop that number next year as they look at better ways to prioritize going forward, especially since that catch-up over the past decade has hopefully caught a lot of the worst candidates. But we'll see. But this is going to be a long-term, expensive proposition going forward, just to maintain one of the major infrastructures that WCC has to deal with. And on the sewer side, as I mentioned, the consent decree was driving a lot of it, but there's, once again, thousands of miles of sewer as well that have to be maintained, consent decree or no. And then the last project I wanted to mention was the Advanced Metering Infrastructure Project. This is one that's been in the CIP for a few years, and it's intended to switch over to an automatic metering system that would allow a number of benefits that I've noted in the packet, both to WSSC and the customer. It also would provide WSSC with a payback. I mentioned earlier the Piscataway Bioenergy Project had a payback. This is the other project in the CIP that has a payback associated with it in terms of cost savings. Those cost savings primarily come from the fact that you move away from manual reading of meters. And in this project, you would have those costs could be allocated to some other priority. You're also getting more just-in-time or more daily data on your system, both for the customer usage as well as the system usage in general. And so you've got benefits in terms of leak detection, information to the customer in terms of their water usage, and possible leaks that the customer may be seeing. Currently, because we have typically a quarterly billing cycle, some leaks that the customer may go undetected for 3 months, perhaps. Whereas in this system, the customer could be either identify it themselves through looking at their own information, or WSSC could alert them that their usage is changing dramatically within a day. And so that would provide significant benefit to both WSSC in terms of lost water anywhere in the system, but also to the customer that isn't paying for that water.
I remember my younger brother was asked to water the yard for our neighbors when they were gone for a couple months, and he went out the first day, he turned the hose on, and never turned it off. And that's the kind of thing this could prevent.
Yeah. And I sort of mentioned earlier that the quarterly billing,
You're home to look at your meter.
one of the other benefits of this,
Now you could, yeah.
if you're no longer having to manually read meters, going from quarterly billing to monthly billing becomes more economical. You're not having to triple your staff to read meters. And so that provides a better customer service, if you will, in a lot of ways in terms of people budgeting their water costs over a monthly period as opposed to quarterly, and of course the leak detection, which would be even faster than that. So there are some benefits to that as well. The payback on this, based on an analysis that was done back in 2011, is about a 6 to 8 year payback. So that is a significant benefit as well in this project, is that relatively short payback. I did note here, the council has gotten some feedback from folks in the community that have expressed concerns about the actual advanced metering infrastructure. Generally, these fall along several lines, and the council has had to deal with these issues in other areas. There's concern about the RF radiation emanating from them, concerns about privacy issues. If WSSC can know about your water usage, get that. We've had similar issues when PEPCO rolled out its smart meter. Certainly, you've got more data. The utility can work smarter, but you do get some pushback from the community on occasion about, well, what does that mean in terms of what am I experiencing in my home? What are the privacy implications? And WSSC is here today to speak to those if the committee wants to bring those up. But I think from staff's perspective, I think the benefits are very, very clear to this program, and the payback is unique, or almost unique, in terms of WSSC projects. So staff feels that those are tremendous benefits going forward.
Right. Ms. Reed or anybody, do you have anything quickly to say about that? And then I want to talk for a second about the authority issue. Go ahead.
I'd like to actually call our intergovernmental relations director up, because she's done quite a bit of research on this, and she's dealing with bills related to this from one of our delegates, Delegate Carr. And so, like, Karen.
Good afternoon. For the record, my name is Karen Riley. I'm the Director of Intergovernmental Relations for WSSC, and I probably know more about AMI than I ever thought I would know in life. These are some concerns that have been brought up, and we've addressed each of these concerns for members of first of all, the bill sponsor, who is a Montgomery County delegate, as well as members of the Metro Washington Committee, which he chairs. We have provided this information, of course, to members of the Montgomery County delegation. Just in terms of process, the Metro Washington Committee found this bill to be unfavorable because they found that the research that we provided was comprehensive and mitigated the concerns that were expressed. So as far as, of course, Keith has done a great job of outlining what the benefits are. In terms of project cost and adoption, I know that was one of the key issues that the bill sponsor had. We continue to show, we still have consultants who are working with us, and we are in the process of finalizing and updating our project costs. It still has a 6 to 7 year payback. We have prepared a report about the health impacts. Every federal, every state public health organization, from the World Health Organization, the American Cancer Society, even the Maryland Public Service Commission has found that there are no public health impacts because of the radio frequency. And I do want to point out that the PSC found this in both their order and their dissent, and it was verified and validated by the Office of the People's Counsel. So that is not a concern. right now that they have identified as a threat to public health. And of course, as WSSC, we are the protectors of public health. That is our core mission. So if there was a concern that greatly outweighed the benefits, of course, we would put more weight for that than what we have as our business case. In terms of privacy, we are, as a quasi-state agency, we're beholden to state legislation on privacy. The information that will be transmitted through AMI will be encrypted, just like your credit card information is. And we do not transfer customer information. We won't transfer their financial information over this process. One of the concerns that we also heard about was job impacts. We have also negated that. There will be no jobs lost because of this technology. In fact, we are working on cross-training our current meter readers so that they can transition with the technology. So that is also something that has been mitigated. So those are the reasons that we found in terms of why this project should continue on, and again, the Metro Washington Committee agreed with us.
Terrific. Okay. Thank you, Ms. Riley. Very helpful. I just wanted to underscore what you said quickly at the outset about the swim lanes. Not everybody watching us today might not know that the county government doesn't set policy generally for WSSC. We just really fund your capital budget, which you're discussing today, the operating budget on the timeline that Keith described. WSSC was established by state government, just like, and the state government has responsibility for WSSC primarily, just like our school system, just like the Park and Planning Commission, and other state-created agencies. It is regulated, as you said, by the Metro Washington Area Committee of the Montgomery County Delegation and its counterpart in the Prince George's Delegation. This part I know pretty well because I spent 8 years on that committee and 4 years chairing it. But you're right, the current chair is Al Carr, our delegate from District 18, and there's legislation regarding this policy in front of that committee. There may be again next year, and so folks who have concerns should talk to their delegates on that committee. They can find them all at montgomerycountydelegation.com and should stay in touch with them to express their concerns on policy areas that the state delegation concerns themselves with, not the funding areas that we do. We have, I did want to say, discussed in the past having an opt-out program as an option as you're setting up the AMI program. And I would want to, I don't know if that's dropped off, but I would want to encourage that option. I was on the Economic Matters Committee when the same thing was discussed regarding PEPCO and Washington Gas. And that was, a little bit inconvenient at the time for the utility, but it was something that was really important to an awful lot of constituents that have these concerns. And as I know, this is going to be years in the making, and I would urge you to work with your contractors to make that an option for people as well, especially because a portion of the public has already come to expect that for the other utilities.
I would like to address that as well. That actually was discussed in the Metro Washington Committee. It came up as an amendment by the bill sponsor, and that amendment was not accepted. And it's because there is a difference between a water utility and electric utility, especially when you're talking in terms of opt-out. So we're patently against opt-outs because when you're leaking water, you cannot leak electricity. So there's a cost impact to have an opt-out on that matter alone when you're looking at non-revenue water. So I think we leak about 15% of our water is non-revenue water. Another one of the concerns that we had, and this is really the primary administrative and financial driver for this, if we have the opt-out, we have to maintain a separate billing system and a separate metering system for that opt-out. It starts to negate the benefits of AMI. The whole purpose of AMI and billing and metering is to be able to have those financial benefits. So we will have to maintain a dual billing system, a dual metering system, and so therefore those costs start outweighing the benefits of AMI. So that would be a concern of ours with opt-out.
Sure. No, I know that's a concern. I remember PEPCO staff saying the same thing back then. And anyway, I'm sure we'll talk about it after the hearing sometime. Keith?
That's all I had. Staff is supportive of the CIP. I mentioned there are a couple of moving parts. WSSC is still finalizing its review of the Blue Plains projects, which are generated obviously by DC Water, and we want to make sure our bills are correct. So there could be some adjustment there, maybe, maybe not. And then, as I mentioned, the Potomac Consent Decree project, there likely will be a bigger bill for that, although it may not be one we have to deal with this cycle. But certainly in the next CIP, we would be seeing an increase in that. But with that, staff was comfortable with the WSSC CIP and the information-only projects as proposed.
Great. Do we have a motion to approve the CIP?
Let's approve the CIP.
Okay, second.
All those in favor? Everybody fine with this? Terrific. Thank you so much.
Just want to congratulate
Educating
you,
us this
Mr. Chairman,
afternoon.
on being chairman, and for Councilmember Reamer and Glass for serving on this distinguished committee.
Thank you so much, Commissioner.
Also for your legislation on the lead in the water in the schools.
You're always very, very welcome back here, and we always feel a lot smarter when you're in the room.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Howie.
Thanks, Howie.
Do you know how long this?
Half an hour maybe, depends on which question.
Okay. Thank you.
I didn't know they voted yet. I mean, I knew that would be the outcome.
Right.
Is that diplomatic enough to remind people who sets policy?
That's good.
I'd rather not get those emails.
No, when Dave came around, I was like, do you have any questions? I was like, no, but I want to know how Tom's going to handle this.
My friend. Gentlemen, we all ready to go? Okay, the moment we've all been waiting for, the briefing, annual briefing on road salt management. Director Roshdi.
Good afternoon, and let me start by saying that Richard Dorsey, our Chief of Highway Services, was looking forward to make this presentation as he did last year. However, he's ill, and I learned this morning that I have to do it, so bear with me. I will do my best.
You'll muddle through. I have a dozen potholes for Richard whenever I get to see him, so we hope he gets well soon.
Okay.
I was meant to say at the beginning that we appreciate the fact that DOT and DEP had in place many best practices already related to road salt, including regulation of proper storage and salt brine on highways and training of workers and contractors, and applying salt and brine before storms rather than just after storms. And I want to thank DOT and DEP for working to update their salt management plan and to advance some of the suggestions that came out of last year's groundbreaking road salt management briefing, including using hybrid rubber plows, plow blades that we're going to hear about today, I think, right? So
Sure.
thank you for that. This sometimes is like many policy areas, can be a difficult topic because we try to strike a balance and guarantee safety on our roads. At the same time, we're doing everything to protect our environment. So we're glad to have two great minds here presenting this updated policy to us. So, thank you.
That was a very good introduction. Let me start by our first slide. Basically, it's safety is a concern. Of course, safety is paramount for our Department of Transportation and Public Safety. So we have some data here regarding crashes as a result of ice and snow. And I want to point out the last item, which is salt brine, prevent snow from ice from bonding to the pavement, because opposite to a belief that the salt is only for melting the snow, the primary function of this salt is to prevent snow to bond to the pavement, so it can be pushed. Because the reason for that rubber blade is really to get that off the road sooner than later, which I will point out a little bit later. Let me talk about changes from last year. What are the new things that we are doing? First of all, we in DOT pride ourselves being a sustainable transportation, and we do a lot of different things from standpoint of social sustainability and environmental and so others. In terms of environmental, using salt and the level of the salt that we put on our road is very important to me and the department as a whole. We started the brine, which is a 80-20 ratio of salt and water last year, and we noticed that it was very effective. We were doing about 900 lane miles, which is our emergency roads. This year, we have expanded that operation to all of our primary residential as well as emergency roads, which is about 1,600 lane miles. And the other pilot program, which I think is going to result in a lot of benefit, is rubber blade. Currently, the steel or the metal blades that we use, you can plow after you have at least 3 inches of snow on the ground. And what we do during the snow, we keep dropping salt on the road, going back and forth. And once this level comes up to about 3 inches, then they can start plowing. So you see people are wondering why the truck is moving, dropping salt, and the blade is not on the ground because it will not be effective. So with this rubber blade, we can actually start pushing snow off the road at 0.5 inches. So you really can reduce the amount of salt that you are applying on the roadway. So we're looking forward to, at the end of this season, to see those operators who had that and the amount of salt we use. So what is the result? And we may, if that is attractive then and results are good, then we will push forward to updating or upgrading our system. And we are in the process of completing our comprehensive, I would say, salt management plan. This plan, it's from handling the salt, rate of salt drop on the road per lane miles, application, usage, at what condition you use the brine, and what situation you use the actual pure salts and so forth. So it's a very comprehensive document. We work with our friends in DEP, and actually this will be part of our program to continue. In terms of salt management, of course, it's as you said, Mr. Hawker, is a balancing act. We care for safety of our community, but at the same time, we care about the environmental impact. And so therefore, how much salt is enough salt to have that safety, but at the same time, not overdoing it. I am aware that there are times that there is a white spot on the road, and especially maybe on neighborhood streets. Oh, oops, I'm so sorry, maybe, yep. And those are situations, first of all, every contractor who wants to work for us, their equipment gets inspected from the spreader, the fire extinguisher, the GPS, because now we are tracking our equipment, either internal, our own, or contractors. And so we have a very robust program in terms of equipment and capability. And then we do training as well.
How often are they inspected?
We inspect right before every season. And then during the operation, the inspectors that inspect the contractors actually look at,
When they pick up
if
the
there is
salt.
something wrong, they pull the truck and make it, fix it. Yeah. So they're spreaders. But however, sometimes when you get into a neighborhood street, it is tight. The driver cannot go as fast as they usually do on other roads, or they stop. And before they turn off the spreader, so some salt gets spread in one spot and then causing this white situation. And then The other item is our partnering with DEP, for example, on watershed protection areas. They communicate with us when there is a higher level of salt or they see elevated salt level in the streams, and we react accordingly, and we work together on those. So there is a lot of communication.
Didn't used to monitor, right? Is that right, Amy?
Well, we've always done grab samples monitoring as we do our biological monitoring, but this year we did install a continuous logging
That's the new.
loggers.
Okay.
Yeah, that's a piece, yeah.
And then, again, on the balancing issue, it's an issue for us not only regionally, but even nationally is an issue. We have our management team in highway services attend national conferences on snow operation, snow removal, new technologies, new ideas, and what are the newest thing that is available that is environmentally friendly, as well as provide the safety that we are looking for. Growing expectation. Our population has been increasing, and of course our lane miles. Right now we are 5,200 lane miles of county road that we treat, and so it increased, and also our impervious surfaces are increasing. Treating sidewalks, and we do now, as you know, sidewalks, we never was doing that before. We do handle the sidewalks. That is not a responsibility of property owners. We do trails, and we do bus shelters. Now we are doing bus stops as well. Bus stops that carry 40 or more passengers per day. We clear those bus stops. And expectation of snow removal has changed dramatically from a standpoint, because I remember when I used to put chain on my car and go without waiting for the snowplow to come. But actually, the previous page, I passed it, we don't have a bare pavement policy for neighborhood street. We basically want to go and just push the snow. However, it leaves some white spot or icy or some snow. And we get calls that it's missed the street. People feel that this road is not. So we try to do curb to curb on our primary roads, but not necessarily on our neighborhood street. But it makes us go back and plow, and sometimes we do drop salts on those neighborhood streets as well. And the economic impact. Before, it was a little bit different than now. We haul away snow from our urban districts or business districts because there is no room for pushing it into the sidewalk anymore. Businesses wants to be up and operating immediately after snow, every snow, regardless of amount. And we have been putting a lot of resources in the past few years to get them off of our road and open the county for business. And of course, at the same time, environmentally conscientious work. Responding to storm, some of you have been in our Storm Operations Center, and some we will give you a tour if you like. The treatment decisions are really based on a variety of factors, and the time, oops. Yeah. Timing a salt application, for example, the brine. There is a decision. We usually get our notices well before a storm comes. If there is a rain before the storm, if we apply the brine, we're basically wasting the salt and everything because it's going to be washed away before the snow comes. Timing of the snow. If it's right before a rush hour, it's a tough call, because if we are doing operation during the rush hour, we are sitting in the same traffic as everybody else, so we become ineffective. So there are times that we have to decide, are we going to do the brine regardless there is a 50% chance of rain and 50% chance of ice? I say, let's go. Let's not take a chance, because we remember when a state actually a Wednesday, I never forget that my Google map entire thing was red because it was ice storm, was not expected. It came during rush hour, and there was nothing anybody could do. So the entire region was red on the Google map. And the timing of the salting application, and each storm is unique. How light is the snow? How much water? The temperature of the surface, air temperature, and is it freezing rain, and so forth. And then on the responding to a storm, as I mentioned, we get a weather forecast, and we rely on 4 sources. The primary one is AccuWeather, which we have a contract with, and we get updated and region. There was some people ask why you don't go by what National Weather Report says, because National Weather Reports is very large area. What happens in Silver Spring doesn't necessarily is the same thing that happens in Up County or Clarksburg. So we may have to respond differently in Silver Spring or Bethesda than we do in Clarksburg or, let's say, Poolsville. And we determine the type of precipitation, what kind is it, and then we create an overall profile of the storm, and then pavement condition forecast, and all those things help us responding to the snow. And we have 4 strategically located, in those 4 stars are sensors that actually senses number of things, gives us real-time grip factor. That means at that moment, what is the grip factor of the surface? It tells us what is the surface temperature. And the reason they are spread the way it is, because we have a different kind of a climate in those 4 regions. And then it tells us, it gives us a picture of the area. We can look at the live photo in terms of what's going on, in terms of what's on the ground. And so it's a live data and everything that will help us to manage our snow operation. And last one is we adjust our salt storage based on evaluation following each individual storm. Now, this one, it's the storm that happened on January 12th. If you recall, the expectation was 2 to 4 inches. By the way, this is the typical profile that we have for every storm. We have pavement temperature projected and what the actual is, and also the forecast air temperature and pavement temperature. The blocks are pavement temperature. And wind, speed of and the direction and so forth. But what is interesting here is, oops, how can I go up? This is very sensitive, okay. This is a start of this storm. It was 2 to 4 inches, and then we ramp up our equipment. When you have 2 to 4 inches, we have 175 pieces of equipment ourselves, and then we decide, okay, how many more do we need? We have a table that is very precise in terms of responding to storms. And this storm was fairly light, and I remember that on Sunday morning, I drove to SOC, and I was surprised at how good our highway folks have done a tremendous job. And I came back around 2 o'clock, and this storm was supposed to be over, turn off. And as you recall, it continued. And if you look at here, let me see if I can move this. Okay. This is our emergency primary roads. We were out there salting and whatever. At this time, which is around in the morning, we decided that we can go into the neighborhood. So Sunday morning, we went into the neighborhood. And and then, of course, if you look at it, at 4 o'clock on Sunday, we went back on the primary roads because I remember I called because I was driving out on Sunday evening, and I noticed all of our primary roads were all white.
Filling back up.
Exactly.
Right.
And this storm is coming harder. So ultimately, the storm changed from 2 to 4 inches to 8 to 12 inches. And again, it was a response to that storm, we went back out into emergency roads, and then Monday morning, we treated all of the neighborhood street. But I can tell you this, I've been with the highway for quite, at least almost 2 decades. And years ago, when we had 8 to 12 inches, you're talking about easily 3, 4, 5 days. And this is much faster, much quicker operation. And we include our contractor. We relied before on county workforce only, and then it would take a lot longer. And then who uses the salt in addition to the county? Of course, the state highway, municipalities, MCPS treat their parking garages, parking lots on the sidewalks around each school. Montgomery College does that. Maryland National Capital Park and Planning do their own park roads and their facilities. Homeowner Association, contractors, and property owners treating driveways and salts. On DEP and DOT partnership, I mentioned some of those, but we provide data for MS4 permit to our friends in DEP. We have, as I said, a draft of salt management plan, which is very comprehensive. This one we are, and it's going to be finalized. Saltage storage site inspection happens. Staff and contractor training, as I mentioned, not only for our own staff, but our contractors. Equipment inspection and maintenance, which we do every year and also periodic before any storm operation. And goods housekeeping practices, which is at any depot site, is one of the critical things to be environmentally sensitive, sweeping and cleaning up of the residue and responding to residential concerns.
Thank you. So we currently have MS4 permit requirements in our current permit that was issued to us in 2010 that we're still functioning under in terms of our reporting. So like Al mentioned, we do reporting in our MS4 report on the amount of salt use in our storms. We report on the techniques they're using, and of course, they've mentioned they use and follow the Federal Highway Administration procedures, and and they're constantly updating, and that is what the state's looking for in terms of meeting and improving our use of salt and meeting our environmental requirements. But there are more requirements coming to us in our future permits, and that's really what this slide's trying to show, is that they're increasing their asks for what the jurisdictions are going to do. One of the first things is a salt management plan, so we have one actually in draft form that we're looking at right now, so well ahead of schedule, which is really great for us to be able to say to the state and take back to them. We are working with the state and with other jurisdictions on what are the requirements within this MS4 report. But I think, we're meeting and trying to be as proactive as we can before we even get the permit. There will be requirements for more monitoring in this permit beyond what we're already doing. And of course, and then the other area that we've started working on, which we'll show a little bit later, is working with our Department of General Services. We'll have to start working with Montgomery County Public Schools, any county-owned property where we're looking at pollution prevention, and one aspect of pollution prevention is salt management. So in terms of what we're doing, as we talked about already, we take grab samples when we do our biological monitoring, which we do around the county on a 5-year rotation. Those are instantaneous readings, and those are just meant to kind of give us conditions of what we're seeing in the biological component. We started a conductivity monitoring in 10 Mile Creek watershed in August. There are several loggers there because that's one of our most pristine watersheds, and we want to understand what are the current conditions. They are around highways, state 270 and others in county roads. So we're looking to see that. We don't have any data yet because we just started in August and it is winter right now. But we're going to continue this, especially as 10 Mile Creek is developed over time. And in addition to that, we've been working, trying to be as proactive as possible. So we do have we've seen some delays in the state schedule with our MS4 permit. we were thinking that it would be much sooner than it is now. We were expecting a draft permit in June of 2019, where we thought we were going to have a final, and then not a final permit until December. So the state has changed that schedule. That being said, we're moving ahead with working towards meeting what we think is going to be in the draft, in the permit. We've already started working with DGS and met with them, and we'll start talking to them about pollution prevention. This is largely because of our partners with DOT and working with them and taking their techniques. We're going to continue working on outreach and education to residents and businesses, because that's the other aspect of this. While we have our county properties and our county roads, we still have private property that we also have to educate owners on. And so we've been partnering with WSSE because of the impact on drinking water, and they're going to have their own website, and we'll be trying to link so that we tell the whole story. The other thing is WSSE has been very proactive on this. They had a summit in December, DOT, DEP, and many jurisdictions attended, and they'll hold it again in April, and we'll keep working with them on these issues, because it's a regional issue. Howard County, Prince George's County, many counties were there. And we really want to encourage the state to look at this as a regional issue too, because, we want best practices across the region. That's going to improve our water quality, especially in our drinking water. So that's really where we are since last year. We'll keep working. Like Al said, this is a balancing act, of course, between public safety and the environment. And, we really value the partnership we have with DOT moving forward. We are very happy that they've already got a salt management plan in place, and we're looking at it right now. And we'll continue working, coordinating, and bringing in other agencies too as we move forward.
Terrific. All right, thank you both. I have a few questions for you, and then I'll turn it over to my colleagues. I want you to know this is a hot topic. People stop me in the grocery store and ask me about road salt now. So, and I'm sure that happens to all of us. So I'm really glad both departments are so attentive to this and ahead of the curve. I think the first question is the most important to me. Now that DOT has a salt management plan, and is this a DOT plan or is it a joint plan? I think it's a DOT plan, but
Yeah.
why don't we consider it a joint plan?
No, actually, it's DOT plan, but they are reviewing and
Sure.
they are giving us a lot of input, so, but it's transportation, DOT.
So what more could the department be doing to accept public feedback on it from motorists, from environmentalists, from pedestrians, other interested residents? There's lots of people, like I said, stop me in the grocery store. I want to tell you about another question I got this morning, but I would encourage you to call a public meeting and invite people, and I would encourage you to set up, at least a web page where people can send in feedback on a little basic form, and send in pictures of road salt piles that they send to us and post on Facebook and other things, so that you could be incorporating feedback and suggestions into your plan.
Yeah, I agree.
We shouldn't wait for the next year's
Yeah.
hearing.
No, actually, once the plan is ready, I see no reason to actually post the salt management plan on our website, so people can read it, and if they want to give us comments. And in terms of meeting with communities, absolutely. Highway does a lot of events, schools and so forth. We can actually do that. Maybe during our Green Fest, because I don't know if you're aware, but one of my high priority is environmental sensitivity, and maybe in that Green Fest we can have a booth just about salt management and get people's feedback. Sure. Anyway, yeah.
Okay, great. What more could you be doing to use salt-resistant plants and trees? I was coming back from a run this morning. This was actually a question before this morning, but I have a master gardener neighbor who stopped me and said, why aren't they planting more yucca? Because they absorb so much water, and they're desert plants, so they're very salt tolerant. So anyway, on the larger question.
Well, and the type of plant we use, we work very closely with DEP, the street trees. And if there are any ideas, we are certainly open. I will talk to our highway arborist and follow up with DEP, see if there are any type of trees or plants that is more, hardy with salt than the ones I use.
Amy, are they part of the Rainscapes recommendations?
We do. We look at plants that can handle more coastal conditions, because that's more salt conditions. So yeah, absolutely, we do that. We do that in our bioretention facilities in particular, but, I mean, if the residents have suggestions, we're open to them.
Great. Okay, another question I received is, are all DOT and contractor drivers instructed to use shovels to scoop up spilled salt and put it back in the truck rather than leaving it on the street?
Well, sometimes the
Randy's
driver-
saying yes.
Yeah, let me answer, sometimes. I have seen truck drivers coming out with a shovel and picking up because if he knows the spreader is malfunctioning, yes. But keep in mind, when you are behind the wheel of that big truck, you don't see what's happening behind you. He can see the spreader is working and spreading while he's driving, he can see the granulars, okay? But he doesn't see the back of truck. Now, we have inspector that goes out and inspect right behind them. And there are times that our inspector notices that there is a malfunctioning spreader. He gets to that truck, get the truck to stop, go back, fix it, or even shovel. So, yes, we do that, but not necessarily by the truck driver. Our inspectors do that. And then we are kind of rely on a lot of feedback.
Neighbors, right.
People call us and there is too much salt in our street. Then we go back and clean them. But I want to point out one other thing.
I wanted to make sure you added that people
Yes.
should call 311, right, to
Absolutely.
report salt piles?
Yes.
Okay, good.
Yes. But the other thing is, for example, we have a forecast for a snow or ice or something, right? At such and such afternoon, at such a time, it's going to happen. So we monitor the forecast. As we get closer and closer, the predictions supposed to be much more accurate than the initial. So we decide that, well, this is time to go ahead and do the brine. So we start brining, and it's 1,600 miles driving is not that little. So we start doing that. And if that snow or ice doesn't happen, people will see all these white lines or white surfaces. Of course, the brine, the advantage with the brine is that it's only 20% salt and 80% water, so it's a lot less. So these are some of the things that happens, and we are expecting a very low temperature, so that the truck drivers tends to use salt in the neighborhood of the street because they know tonight is going to go 7 degrees or 5 degrees, and that is very cold and could be very.
Right. Do all your county and contractor drivers have shovels on board?
I'm sure they have. I have seen them with a shovel, so
Shovels and brooms.
They're required to.
It's a requirement. It's one of those inspection requirements.
Terrific. Does DEP share the data on the salt impact on local waterways from your testing
With DOT,
or with the public?
with the public, we can. I'm not sure it's directly available on our website. I think this salt study we're doing in 10 Mile Creek, when we need about at least a year, if not more, to be able to understand the trends we're seeing, but we can share it. It right now is not available, but it certainly can be made available.
Okay. Does the testing that you've been doing show trends in the impact on the impacts of the use of brine and the reduction of salt?
It's a conductivity, so it's looking for chloride,
Okay.
primarily, and more salt. But no.
You get less
Or-
conductivity if you have less.
Yeah, it's really measuring the ions from chloride, yes,
Right,
right.
So you'd be able to show the benefits of using brine, the environmental
I think
benefits.
that could be one conclusion, yeah.
Right. Okay, and then have you gotten away from beet juice totally? No more beet juice.
Oh, no.
That's what I thought.
No, the red ones?
Yeah, that was last year. Right, it wasn't effective.
No, the state highways use beet juice, but to my knowledge, the county has not.
We never did beet juice.
Never
We did
used it?
one time.
Just one, that's what I remember.
One-
Okay,
one.
but no more. You learned your lesson. Okay. Anecdotally, because
We're talking about the maglev.
no, not the maglev.
Liquid magnesium.
No. Anyway, let me move on. Constituents have written in about uneven application of salt in neighborhoods. Here's one, quote, For instance, in Woodmore, some streets are properly salted, have speed bumps of salt, and some are an entire layer of salt from one curb to another. What else can departments do with the operators to ensure quality control?
Mr. Hooker, this is obviously an ongoing issue for us. We're constantly training our own drivers, working with the contractors. You know, these things do happen. We recognize that. We're trying to be responsive to it. You know, I came up here to help out with the feedback loops that are in place. 311, we got a lot of messages on social media. Your offices also call us. You know, we do go out and follow up on those issues. We make our drivers, we make contractors aware of it. You know, again, as Al said, their job is to get out there and spread the stuff and push the snow out of the way, and this is an after-action issue that we have to often come back to.
Okay.
But we are constantly working with the drivers to kind of improve that aspect of our operation.
But the main, you're inspecting the equipment, training the drivers, and people
Yes.
should call 311.
Yes.
Great, thank you. Okay, colleagues?
Thank you. Great briefing. Seems like there's been a lot of improvement in this whole topic area. Really impressive to see what's happening. I didn't have additional questions about road salt. I want to talk about just snow removal and go back to the sidewalk and the plowing issues. Maybe you could go back to that slide. That would be super helpful. As you go, overall, I just want to say your team is amazing. The removal operation is absolutely superb. I think your comment that years ago it would have taken multiple days to remove snow from a 10 or 12-inch event is so true. And, you know, people are getting back to work fast, and their lives are proceeding, even despite adverse weather. And that means a lot. You know, people really value that. I think as a parent, sometimes we're buffered because the schools are not quite as in sync as your ability to get to work. You know, there's other issues there. But I think the rest of the community is sort of like, this is amazing, you know, how well it's going. There are always issues. There's always streets that are missed. There's always things that happen. And so what I like is you have a terrific operation for responding to that information. And even to the point where, you know, your team, if a comment is made on Facebook on my page, your team is now able to, even using Facebook, get that location and send somebody. I don't even have to take the information off of Facebook and then email it in. You're really in real time, and I think that is just super helpful. And Al, I think it's a testament to your operational expertise and the team that you brought together. It's very, very solid, very superb. So to continue to challenge you, you know, there are a number of issues. Councilmember Hucker and I communicate with your department about one of these, you know, when snow gets plowed at the corner, blocking pedestrian access off the sidewalk. And I think that's not really the way you want it to be done, and it may be how I don't know that I think you direct the plow not to do that, I think, but I'm not sure. But it is an issue where you plow up a pile at the corner and there's no longer a way for a pedestrian to get across the street.
Actually, at the intersection, I can have Randy, which is our Chief of Pavement Management System, and he's has many years of experience in this field. When we clear the intersection, we actually go and clear those ramps, if you're talking about the,
Right.
at the intersection.
Correct.
Of course, when the plow is driving on the road, on the street, it pushes the snow to the right, so ultimately, those driveways or, let's say, driveways gets blocked off, and then
Driveways along the street, but I'm talking
but the
about the
ramps,
corners.
no, we clear those. And go ahead, and if you can answer that question.
Al's absolutely correct. When you plow, the snow berm rolls off the right side of the plow blade into that curb line. It'll create that berm,
Right,
driveways, sidewalks, ADA ramps.
right.
The only way, and even as a plow driver has to clear an intersection, he's backing up and pushing, backing up and
Yes.
pushing. It takes
Right.
more time to do that.
Right.
But the end result is that snow still rolls to that right curb line. The only way to clear that is come back with other resources that we're using these days, is to clear the sidewalks.
Okay, so that same truck can't do that.
No.
We, actually, this was because that was a question I had from Richard, is at the intersections, because I noticed that our ramps were cleared, and I was wondering, is it the property owner or the shopping center is doing it, or we are? And he did tell me that they go back and they make sure that those ramps at the intersection are clear.
So, just again, continue to simplify. So we got a four-way intersection here. Are you saying that that the pedestrian access across is not something that the first truck does at all, or it's only one corner of that intersection? I didn't quite understand what you said.
So if the truck plows straight through the intersection,
Yeah,
that berm is straight through the intersection on the right side.
right.
So he actually has to back up and
Right.
push that berm
And
around the corner to the right curb line.
does he do that? Or is that you said other resources?
They do that, but it's still, that berm is blocking the
other-
ADA ramps and driveways and everything else, because that's the only way to get it off the roadway to the right curb. Then we have to follow up with other resources to clear those access points.
And is there
That's part of our quality control, where we are in, when we go to the neighborhood, and there was, somebody was questioning, why are we saying, okay, let us finish first before you can put in your missed street, because if we haven't declared that we are done, then your street may not be missed. So at that point, not only we are going for all those who have declared that, or at least claiming that we have missed their street, or they need more cleanup, they also go to those intersections. That's what I specifically found out, that they go to those intersections, make sure the intersection itself and those sidewalk ramps at the intersection are clear. So if you are crossing the street, you are clear.
So at the moment, it's sort of a case-by-case, complaint-driven issue. If people find an intersection.
Then they can contact us, we go right.
Then contact you and we get out. I mean, I will say for my own part, just this is not a super applicable, but I live at a corner lot, and I try to be careful to, when I do my sidewalk, also to cut through the berm so that, that access is there. And people should try to do that, because, we can't send additional crews out to cut every berm at every corner. But there are some places where the snow is too big for anyone to be able to take responsibility for that, and so on and so forth.
I want to make sure that I'm clear on this. When I was talking about we go back and clear those ramps, usually these are major intersections.
Yeah.
Because we have intersection in every neighborhood street. We are not going back to those dues. We are expecting those homeowners or property owners that when they're clearing their sidewalks, they're going to make sure they have access to the street at those points. So we do not go back to every one of those intersections to make sure that the sidewalk is connected to the street. But the major intersection, we go back.
I mean, I guess so. This gets to my second point, which is curb to curb. I wonder if curb to curb is really the best. I know it clears the most snow, but is it really the best? Because when you go to the curb, then you're pushing up snow onto the sidewalk, and on a street that doesn't have a buffer, there's nowhere else for that sidewalk to sit. Can you take a more refined approach so that
We only do curb to curb on the emergency and primary roads. You don't do that on
so
the.
it's not the neighborhood road?
No, because if you're driving on Route 20, for example, if you notice, there is a little bit more snow on the right lane than the middle or the left lane. And most people tend to drive on those lanes that is clear. So ultimately, it has to be cleared because people hesitant to go and drive on those. And if you want to keep the traffic moving, we felt that curb to curb is a requirement for our emergency and primary roads.
For the big roads?
For the big roads. The
But I'm
smaller
talking
roads,
more about
no.
the smaller roads.
No, we just plow, and most of the times there are cars parked along the street, and sometimes our truck blade barely make it between those cars. So it's,
Slide 4.
Yeah, for example, slide 4 is a good example of,
The backup one.
if I can find this. Okay.
There's a residential street.
Yeah. You see, that's not a curb to curb. And some people call us and say we missed their street because this is not acceptable. That's why I was talking about expectation. Expectation has gone up, and now people would like to, with any driving capability or they want to be able to drive out, right?
Now, as far as sidewalks that you are responsible for, you have a map
We have a map,
published.
and then at the
And
same
it's-
time, we have a crew, we have equipment, we go and clear those sidewalks. Not only the sidewalks, we now do the trail, we do.
Keppel Crescent Trail,
Yes.
from where to where?
Wherever it's asphalt, I believe,
Okay, anywhere that it's asphalt.
I don't have a list right now,
Yeah.
sure, with it, I can forward it to you.
But it's just, I presume it's the asphalt portion of the Capitol Crescent Trail?
yes.
Any consideration of expanding that to other trails, like Rock Creek Trail or other asphalt trails?
If there are asphalt trails, we are doing those, but I will double check. I don't want to say for sure, but we did expand to bus stops, for example, starting last year. We said, okay.
Now, you've been doing bus stops for a long
We're
time.
doing
You and-
bus shelters. I'm
Ah,
talking about when you see that stick, only one sign.
Gotcha.
And if that stop does 40 people a day, we're clearing the snow.
Gotcha.
So there's a lot we are doing that we did not do in the many years ago.
great. Thank you.
Few quick questions. So piggybacking off of Councilmember Reamer's questions regarding location of the berms. Constituents contacted me about cul-de-sacs and throwing the snow back onto their driveways when going, I guess, counterclockwise. Any consideration to doing it clockwise and throwing the snow into the center of those circles?
Well, let me say this because I live on a cul-de-sac and I had my experience this time because a truck that came to my street, it was 10-wheel. It was a huge truck. Couldn't even turn around the cul-de-sac because some cul-de-sacs has a, let's say, garden or whatever in the middle, so curb. This truck couldn't. So I noticed, I was watching him because he was too big and he was pushing it and then backing up and then pushing on the other side. And it was struggling because he wanted to get to the other side. It did. So if the truck is not too big, then of course they can go in either direction, and I'm sure he's gonna, direct those contractors to do that. But yeah, but then the snow has to go in the center then. There has to be, because some cul-de-sac is an open area and there is no vegetation, whatever, grassy area in the middle.
I don't live on a cul-de-sac. I'm just relaying ideas that constituents have contacted me about, so.
Sure.
Not all hard trucks have reversible plows that can reverse and go the other way. So most plows dump to the right, not to the left. So that doesn't mean it couldn't be fixed in the future, but when you hire contractors, they're not all equipped the same way. The other thing about thinking about why put it in the median as opposed to the right side, what happens when that snow melts and it runs across the cul-de-sac and refreezes? So if it's already on the outside perimeter and melts, it's collected in the normal drainage system of that pavement section. You have to think about refreeze.
Interesting counterpoint, sure. So the other aspect that intrigued me, that was new to me, was that there are inspectors who follow the contractors. Can you elaborate a little bit more about that?
So we have 219 plow routes that are properly equipped for different depths of storms. In order to implement 200 hard trucks, we bring in inspectors that know those plow routes and know those hard trucks. So as the trucks are deployed, they're monitoring their locations and what they're doing, their salt usage, application rates. They go behind them and actually see if they did their job and their proper salting applications. If they see issues like a salt pal or where they dump salt, if the contractor operator didn't see it, they'll call them back through cell phone communications or through a text through our snow ops, and they'll come back and take care of it right away.
And then, last question, so 219 plow routes, how many different contractors or contractor companies do we usually employ?
It depends on the type of storm, how long the storm lasts, the depth of the storm. We may not need any if we're just
How many
getting,
contractors do we have?
we have over 400 contractors.
But let me say this, one of the strength of our highway services, to be honest with you, is capability to ramp up. if you remember that 38-inch snow that we had a couple of years ago, it started with a small. We actually were planning for 100 contract pieces and the rest of it ours. And then as we got the storm started coming, it kept changing every day. And I tell you what, these contractors want to make money during those events. And the highway has established a relation with them. We pay them right, we monitor them, and when we need those trucks, we can get them. And during that storm, at one point, we had 1,000 pieces of equipment on the road. And they came to us rather than going to a state or city of, this and that, or other jurisdiction or even DC. So we have the capability. Some of these companies have hundreds of trucks. Some of them are single truck, single guy. The way we do it, we put $1 per hour, depending on the type of truck. And if you are interested to work for us, you come, we inspect your truck, then we will be called in. And they love to work for us, and we've been able to ramp up during emergencies.
I was curious how many are independent contractors or independent, truck owners versus companies. Last question, because I'm aware of the time. Of the contractors that we have, how many are based in Montgomery County?
Probably all of them.
Yeah, I don't think so. No one's ever asked me that, but I can find out.
Push the button.
Unfortunately, I don't know that fact for you right now. Most of them are within the county. Most of them were like these mom and pop landscape outfits that perform services within the county. I have watched our snow ops, and when they enter the system, you can see where they commute from to get to the depots to load up. So most of them, you can see them moving within the county. There's a few that come from Frederick County, but not that many.
Yeah, I would assume that given, when we have weather situations like that, everyone is going to want to work close to home, just the nature of the beast. And if my memory serves, our former county executive used to say, what, $1 million an inch of snow, something like that. And to know that it's being reinvested back into our community through our local businesses would be reassuring. Great.
We'll find out the location of this contractor and let you know.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you all. This is really helpful. And Alan, Randy, I definitely want to
I just have one question.
echo the comments of Councilmember Reamer. I heard personal observation and a lot of compliments about the performance this season. So I really appreciate all your hard work, and thanks for all the work on the road salt plan. Dr. Orland.
Just have one question. Last fall, the council approved a supplemental for $3.3 million to remove the salt off of Site 2 and build a new salt dome in Krebs Branch. Given the reduction in salt usage and all the things you're doing, do we need to do that anymore? We need to spend the money to get the salt off of Site 2, but we need to build a new salt dome.
Actually, I reduced the size of the domer that we were asking substantially. Now we are asking for a 25,000-ton capacity. So before, this is in comparison with what the capability that was at Site 2 is quite smaller. And based on all of our experience, we don't want to be in a situation that when there is a major ice storm, one after the other, and there is no salt in the region. If you remember a few years ago, Baltimore County and Prince George's County called me at night.
I do.
They said, and we gave them salt because, and then the other thing is, when we have a storm, do I want my trucks to be pushing snow in the neighborhood or going to Baltimore Harbor to bring back salt? So this is really but in terms, your point is absolutely correct, but we went from a much larger capacity to a smaller, and we reduced that to 25,000.
Okay. Thank you. Very helpful. You're the salt of the earth.